And now for tonight's program, we're pleased to welcome Joe Mato, or Mato. He doesn't seem to have much of a preference here for our program tonight, presenting selections from his collection of images of the Hartford and Connecticut Western Railroad, which later became the Central New England Railroad before being absorbed into the New Haven system. Joe grew up in Danbury next to the Maybrook line. His interest in the railroad started when he was 3 years old, but he never worked for the railroad and instead became a commercial airline pilot. Before he stopped flying, he started working at the Danbury Railway Museum, and later he fired locomotives at the Valley Railroad and volunteered at Steamtown in Scranton. In 2005, Joe and Bernie Rudberg started the CNE bus tours, showing people one segment of the CNE Railroad at a time. Bernie died in 2016, but the tours continued on until COVID hit in 2020. Joe, it's all yours.
Okay, the Connecticut and the Hartford and Connecticut Western Railway started in 1871 and it ran till about 1938. The man behind it is Edgar T. Butler of Norfolk, Connecticut. The reason he was so interested in starting a railroad was there was no service in Norfolk. And the secondary reason was the iron industry needed rail service. They had iron about 15 miles from the foundry, and they needed to find a good way to get it there. Also, the wood was being moved. There was a charcoal plant at the factory, and they made railroad car wheels in Salisbury. And that was a very lucrative operation in itself. So Mr. Butler was good friends with former Governor Holly, who owned the knife factory in Salisbury, and also Mr. Barnum, Barnum and Richardson, that made the railroad car wheels. And they talked, and they decided they needed to start a railroad. Initially, they were going to go from Collinsville to Canaan. And they did get a charter in 1867. They found George Brown of the Dutchess and Columbia Railway, and they spoke to Mr. Brown and decided that they wanted to hook up. So they decided they could meet up in Millerton, New York. And the DNC worked to get to Millerton, and Mr. Butler proceeded to get there also. He got chartered. After he met Mr. Brown, he got rechartered in 1868 and subscribed money from the different towns. Most of the towns in the valley, like Collinsville and New Hartford, already had a deal with the canal line, the Northampton canal line. So what they did was they got money from Hartford, which stipulated they needed to make that their base of operations. And they went with that. and started construction in 1869 in October. And basically it was completed in 1871. And what makes this so interesting to me was that as soon as they get the rail in, before it was even ballasted, they're pulling iron out on the construction trains. And by the time they were actually running freight in November, they got 154 loads of iron ore in. So they're really hustling. I thought that was incredible. I read all this in a local paper, the Connecticut Western News, and every week they give you a blow-by-blow description. It was a fantastic reading. It was very good reading. So as I said, they started running freight in November, and it was good timing because it was below zero, and they were bringing coal in from Pennsylvania. So the timing was very good. They started running passengers in December, and this went on until the Poughkeepsie Bridge was built, and opened in 1889. And it took a while, but they got it basically connected as far as Campbell Hall, New York. And that's with the Erie. That worked out very well. That turned into the Maybrook Yard and the Poughkeepsie Bridge, which we'll talk about in a later day. During the Depression, the New Haven was bankrupt, and they were running all the traffic for the Maybrook line that they could. So gradually the CNE was kind of just not used anymore. And they, like I said, they pulled it up just before World War II. Go ahead. Bob Adams has a terrific series of articles. He was with Trains Magazine, and they're all at the Lakeville Journal at Scoville Memorial Library, and also the Connecticut Western. It's another newspaper of the era, and that was very helpful. Go ahead. The era we're looking at, up to about 1920, there were no telephones, no electricity, really. And people got their news from the railroad stations, which had telegraphs. And that's where people would gather, exchange news, learn that the Titanic sank or the Yankees won the World Series, whatever. That's where they went to get their news. Go ahead. We're starting Millerton. This was taken in 1927. And go ahead. On the left side, you have the freight house, which is moved west about 200 yards, and it's part of the lumberyard now. To the right is a section shed and your depot. depot. That's about 1.5 miles to state line in Connecticut. Go ahead. This is state line. It's a Y. And in front of you is pointing east. Go ahead. Looking east, the block to the right is a state line marker. Go ahead. Cook's Cut. They hired everybody in town to shovel the snow out, and you can see why. There's a crowd up there now. Go ahead. They were burning coal, you can see by the chimney. And Orr Hill. Go ahead. They ran a fill across, and I don't know how they did it because it's 240 feet deep. They tried to get it going for World War II to process iron ore, and they couldn't get the water out. Go ahead. Some of the workers. Flag stop at Orr Hill. And looking eastbound. This is Lakeville Lake or Lake Wanakapomack. The depot at Lakeville. The lake again. No, it's still there, by the way. And this is a screen. They're using 3 engines to shovel the snow. The building in the back is Mr. Holly's Knife Factory. In this site, they made cannons during the Revolutionary War. And about 1/3 of all the cannons used were made in this location. Right. This bridge was pulled up in 1951, and it was always a problem as low weight bearing. An accident. Another shot from the Lakeville Depot. And that's before they had roads. And proceeding eastbound. Salisbury. This is the second depot in this location. The first one burned down. And this was relocated from Berea, New York. Go ahead.
Joe, we did have a request to just slow down on advancing the pictures a little bit.
No problem. In back of the depot is the Scoville Library that I talked about. And this is the source of all the information on the CNE. They're very good. Go ahead. Barnum and Richardson. As I said before, they made railroad wheels. You can see them out in front. And they were the best in the world. They're chilled cast iron, and the back were all ribbed, like cooling ribs. They were expensive. This is located in Lime Rock, which is part of Salisbury at the south end. Another view of Salisbury Depot. There's a water tank just to the left of the depot, and people would come in, drain their water, and get the Salisbury water because the engine ran better on it. And this was noted by the station agent's son, who wrote a book on Salisbury. Go ahead. And there's the water tank. The footings are still there. And this is looking east. And the freight house is on the left side. And on the right side, you have community service, which is a lumber yard, feed, almost like an agway. Continue. Another accident. (1918), okay. What we have in front of the furnace, pig iron. They're about 50 pounds a piece. And they come from a sow or a large container, and they're the little pigs, so. Like I said, the railroad and the iron industry were joined at the hip. This bridge is a recovered turntable. I believe it's from New Milford, Connecticut. And this is going into Taconic. And this is east of the bridge, looking westbound. To the right is another blast furnace, was owned by Chapin, and that went out of business at the turn of the century. Twin Lakes has a causeway on it. It's named after two Indian princesses. Go ahead. You'll notice that the depot at Twin Lakes has cedar posts, and they're pretty rough. Very rustic. I like this little guy on the ladder. He looks like he's having a great time. Go ahead. And that's your causeway. That's looking from the east. An engineer friend of mine told me that they were going down this area and they came up on a fellow that was skiing. It was in the winter, of course. And they just crept up along in back of him, and he never noticed it. They finally stopped and blew the whistle, and it scared him to death. Twin Lakes again. And that's east of Twin Lakes. These signs must weigh about 150 pounds. They're made out of cast iron. This is the original Housatonic Bridge. Wood. Go ahead. And the plate girder bridge they had later on. Beautiful location. Just outside of Canaan, there's a big rock about 25 feet high, and it's got all these ledges on it that you can cuddle up and stay out of the rain, build a fire, stay warm. And that's what the tramps did. They called it Tramp Rock. And that lasted until after World War I, when the freight business kind of died out in Canaan. Go ahead. The original Blackberry River Bridge was a Howe truss bridge made of wood. And there it is. Another picture of it. Tower and water tank. You'll see the two spouts on the right side. That's over here. That's for the water. Go ahead. That's taken from the top of the tower, looking eastbound. The area to the left is where the Y is, and that's where they turned around the big engines. You see the bridge and the coal tipple. Okay. Hungry Ed Smith is the engineer. They sometimes call him Banana Smith. Go ahead. They had a new engineer, and he went too fast through town, wasn't able to stop, and ran into the caboose. It killed the worker who was doing his logs in the caboose. Go ahead. That's the remains of the caboose. And that's basically where the wire track runs out of. You look to the right and over, it turns around here. Go ahead. They ran to Hartford daily until 1927. It was in December they stopped. This is looking east in the yard. This is Route 44 crossing Main Street, the Church Street. The Borden Creamery, that's no longer there. The Canaan Depot was put up in 1872. In December, it started operating, and it's beautiful. It's probably the prettiest depot I've ever seen. It was made by G.H. Bundy, who was a cabinet maker. He made the station here in Salisbury and in Lakeville. All three were made by him. They were beautiful work. This is the Connecticut Western in front of us here. Another view of the corner. That's the back where they handled all the Railway Express. And there's a ball. And when the ball is high, the Housatonic trains are clear. And that's how it works. So if they have a low ball, then the Connecticut Western trains, and that's the Connecticut Western train on your right side. They had one of the best cafeterias going in there. They made pies that were out of this world. There's another view of the eyeball. The lime industry was very big in East Canaan. And they call it Allendale because everybody there's last name is Allen. Go ahead. It's still going full till Pfizer doesn't run it anymore. Somebody else does. And more pigs stacked up in the yard. I think that was their last furnace, number 3. Go ahead. This depot was moved to become a liquor store. The Whiting Arch is probably the coolest place on the railroad. They were built in 1870. By 3 local masons. Their names are in the plate on top. And I believe it's made out of limestone, which is local. Go ahead. You can see they used 100 horse days and 50 man days to fill this in. It took about a month and a half. There's a hill on the west side they dug out with a steam shovel, and they used these carts to bring all the fill over. Go ahead. There's a steam shovel and the little carts they got. This is a double header, the circus train, and it's a beautiful picture taken in 1907. A milk shed. This bridge was built later on, up to like the 19-teens. This was, you had to go over the grade in your car. You had to drive up that slope, go over the grade and then down. You can imagine what a pain in the rear end that was. Go ahead. This is near Mr. Butler's property. He's right up the hill. Go ahead. And that's a later shot. Stony Lonesome, with a name like that, and Satan's Kingdom. I walked over this and I fell in love with it. I couldn't believe it. What a piece of work. Goes around Haystack Mountain. Go ahead. And you can see they did a lot of digging here. A lot of blasting to get this. 75 feet anyway, the cliffs are. They had problems with boulders falling from time to time, and that would cause an accident. You have Haystack Mountains on your left side, that big hill. And this is going into Norfolk. That's the first station. The second station built by the town is still there, made out of stone. Beautiful, beautiful location. This is right after the blizzard of 1888, March 1888, where they hired everybody in town basically to shovel it out. And that's a view from the back. Right. That's the highest point on the railroad, maybe 2 miles east of the Norfolk Depot. It's the summit. Right about here is a pond, and that's where the Mad River starts. Okay. Grants is a couple miles down the stream. They used to haul wood out of there for the blast furnace. And the flag stop. Right here was a sawmill they used for wooding out the engines. They're wood burners till about 1890. Ledges just west of Winstead. And the engine house. It's you saw that when we started the show, and what's pretty remarkable about it is that later on they had to pay 50 cents because the engines were too big to run on the stable, and they got really bent out of shape every time they had to spend 50 cents. Five or six different depots in Winstead. This is the original one. And it was replaced in 1876 by a brick station that lasted 90 years. There's a copy of it in Thomaston, just down the Naugatuck River. Looks just like the one they had in Winstead. Beautiful. And this is West Winstead. Not much upstairs on that one. As you can see, it's virtually a one-level station. And this is probably my favorite picture of all times. And it tells you everything. You can see the engines working like heck. There's a fellow on the second or third car ready to put the brakes on. You can see the Lincoln pin coupler and the headlight. It's not electric. This era had some of the most dangerous railroading known to man. And the accident rate in 1890 was second only to coal mining as far as fatalities. The railroad commissioner in Iowa, his name was Lorenzo Coffin. He was commissioner in 1887, and then he spent the next 3 years lobbying Congress to have a safety act that everybody would follow and reduce the number of people that were getting killed, basically needlessly. Because the companies didn't want to put, ladders, grab bars, anything. They wouldn't put anything on the cars. How can you get up? It's ridiculous. You work around equipment, you know that your life revolves around grabbing onto equipment. So it was the best thing that ever happened to the railroad industry. The Safety Appliance Act of 1893 gave the railroad 7 years to get their act and basically get their act together. But what that tells you is you look at the picture and it dates the picture for you. So it's a good tool to use. Also, the type chimney, is it a coal burner or a wood burner? It's a wood burner. Go ahead. Winstead again, one of the depots. And that's the New Haven depot on the left side. This is taken at the Red Car Bridge, pretty close to where the Still River is, where the Mad River runs into. Running up a hill. That's your depot. And the Raleigh Street Viaduct. The part on the left side is still there. The rest of it was taken down. It was built in 1907. And the interesting thing is, when they took the bridge down, it was harder than when they put it up because they used so much rebar, steel bar building it. And you can see it goes all the way in back here. Do you see how far it goes? Go ahead. The freight house is now a boathouse. It's still there. And they painted it up. It looks good. 150 years later. This is where they started construction. It's right by where the Route 8 comes out now. And that was a flag stop at one time. The railroad ran underneath. And the trolley ran from 1897 until 1927. And it was good transportation while it lasted.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And with this, we had a number of comments about great slideshow here. So thanks to those of you who are watching on Facebook.